Marcus Kane sat in the corner of the grimy cantina, his cybernetic left arm clicking softly as he raised another glass of synthetic alcohol to his lips. The amber liquid burned down his throat, but not enough to wash away the memories that haunted him every waking moment. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler 442b, 3 years since everything he believed in crumbled to ash. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of spacers, traders and drifters that populated Nexus Station. But what made Marcus's jaw clench were the aliens scattered throughout the establishment. A group of insectoid wrecks clicked and chittered in their corner booth, their compound eyes occasionally glancing his way. Near the bar, a tall Etherean swayed gently, its translucent blue skin shimmering under the dim lights. Every alien presence in the room felt like salt in an open wound. Marcus had once been Sergeant Major of the 7th Colonial Marines, a decorated soldier who fought in humanity's expansion across the galaxy. He'd believed in the mission, believed that humans were destined to spread among the stars and forge alliances with alien civilizations. That naive faith died screaming on Kepler 442b. The planet was supposed to be a routine colonization mission, 15,000 human settlers protected by Marcus's Marine Battalion, establishing humanity's newest foothold in the Outer Rim. The Zephyrian Collective had even signed treaties guaranteeing safe passage and peaceful coexistence. Marcus remembered feeling proud as he watched families disembark from the colony ships, children laughing as they took their first steps on alien soil. The attack came at dawn on the settlement's 3rd day. Zephyrian warships dropped out of hyperspace like deadly flowers blooming in the morning sky. There had been no warning, no declaration of war, no chance to evacuate the civilians. The aliens had simply decided that humans were a threat to be eliminated. Marcus's Marines fought with everything they had, but they were outnumbered 50-1. He watched his men die one by one, their screams echoing across the settlement's burning streets. Worse were the civilians, families cut down as they ran for shelter, children crying over their parents' bodies, elderly colonists too slow to escape the Zephyrian pulse weapons. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Marcus was one of only 37 survivors out of 15,000 souls. His left arm had been vaporized by a plasma blast along with half his face. The rescue ships found him 3 days later, clutching the body of a dead child he'd tried to save. Now he drifted from station to station, taking odd jobs and drinking away his pension. The military had offered him counseling, reconstruction, even a promotion. Marcus told them exactly where they could stick their offers. How could he serve a government that still pursued diplomatic relations with the same species that had committed genocide? Another round soldier boy? The bartender, a gruff human named Chen, didn't wait for an answer before refilling Marcus's glass. Marcus grunted his thanks and returned to his brooding. The prosthetic arm the military had given him was top of the line, with full sensation and strength greater than his original limb. But it was a constant reminder of what he'd lost, what they'd all lost. Sometimes he caught himself flexing the artificial fingers, feeling the servos whir beneath synthetic skin. A commotion near the entrance caught his attention. 3 Zephyrians had entered the cantina, their reptilian features and scaled skin immediately recognizable. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol on his hip, his heart rate spiking. These weren't the same subspecies that had attacked Kepler 442b. These were traders from a different clan, supposedly peaceful. But Marcus had learned not to trust the distinctions aliens made among themselves. The Zephyrians moved to an empty table, speaking in their hissing language. Other patrons gave them a wide berth, whether out of respect or fear, Marcus couldn't tell. He forced himself to look away, to focus on his drink instead of the growing urge to draw his weapon. Chen noticed his tension. "Easy there, Kane, those are just merchants. Been coming through here for months without trouble. Yeah?" Marcus's voice was rough with disuse and alcohol. "That's what they told us about the peaceful collective too. Right up until they started glassing colonies." The bartender had heard this story before. Most people on the station knew Marcus's history, knew why he drank alone and why smart people didn't mention the war around him. Chen just nodded and moved on to other customers. Marcus tried to return to his drinking, but his eyes kept drifting back to the Zephyrians. They were smaller than the warriors he remembered, with lighter scales and more delicate builds. One of them, barely more than a juvenile by the looks of it, seemed nervous about something. It kept glancing around the cantina with quick, darting movements. A crash from the kitchen made everyone jump. One of the cook's assistants had dropped a tray of glasses, sending shards skittering across the floor. The noise was sharp and sudden like weapons fire. Most patrons barely noticed, but Marcus hit the deck, his combat instincts overriding 3 years of civilian life. He found himself crouched behind an overturned table, hand on his pistol, scanning for threats that weren't there. The familiar taste of adrenaline flooded his mouth as his enhanced hearing picked up every sound in the suddenly quiet cantina. When he finally stood up, dozens of eyes were watching him with mixtures of pity and curiosity. "Just a flashback," he muttered, holstering his weapon and righting the table. Nothing to see here, but the damage was done. The episode had shattered his carefully maintained facade of control, reminding everyone present that Marcus Kane was a broken man pretending to be whole. He threw some credits on the bar and headed for the exit, ignoring Chen's concerned calls. As he walked through the station's corridors toward his cramped quarters, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling toward some inevitable confrontation. Every day brought fresh reminders of the aliens who had destroyed everything he'd cared about. Every night brought dreams of burning colonies and screaming children. He paused at his door, looking back down the corridor toward the cantina. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems, the mechanical heartbeat that kept them all alive in the cold void of space. It sounded almost like breathing, like something vast and patient waiting for him to make his next move. Marcus didn't know it yet, but that next move would come sooner than he thought, and it would change everything he believed about aliens, about humanity, and about himself. The universe had a strange sense of irony, and it wasn't finished with Sergeant Major Marcus Kane. The emergency klaxons woke Marcus from another nightmare. He'd been dreaming of Kepler 442b again, watching helplessly as Zephyrian ships rained death from above. The harsh red emergency lighting bathed his quarters in the color of blood as he rolled out of his narrow bunk. Instantly alert despite the lingering effects of last night's drinking, station-wide announcements crackled through the comm system. "All security personnel to level 7. Breach in Cargo Bay Delta. This is not a drill." Marcus pulled on his clothes and checked his plasma pistol out of habit. Whatever was happening wasn't his problem anymore. He was a civilian now, a washed-up ex-Marine with no obligations to anyone but himself. The smart thing would be to stay in his quarters until the situation resolved itself. But old instincts die hard. Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself moving through the station's corridors toward level 7. He told himself he was just curious, that he needed to know if the station was in real danger. The truth was that part of him missed the clarity of combat, the simple certainty of knowing who the enemy was and what needed to be done. The corridors grew more chaotic as he approached Cargo Bay Delta. Station security rushed past him in full tactical gear, their faces grim behind helmet visors. Emergency crews wheeled medical equipment in the opposite direction, preparing for casualties. The organized chaos reminded Marcus of military operations, bringing back memories of better times when he'd been part of something larger than himself. He reached the security perimeter just as Commander Sarah Walsh, the station's head of security, was coordinating the response. Walsh was a former Navy officer who'd served with distinction in the border wars. She and Marcus had developed a grudging mutual respect over his time on the station, bonded by their shared military background and their mutual distrust of bureaucrats. "Kane?" Walsh spotted him in the crowd of onlookers. "What are you doing here?" "This is a restricted area. Heard the alarms. Thought you might need an extra gun." Marcus kept his voice steady, professional. The alcohol was burning off quickly, replaced by the familiar edge of potential combat. Walsh studied him for a moment, weighing options. "Smugglers tried to run a shipment of banned tech through the cargo bay. When we moved to intercept, they triggered some kind of explosive device. The blast tore open their ship's cargo hold and scattered debris everywhere. Problem is, we're picking up multiple life signs in the wreckage, but they're not human. Aliens." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Unknown species. Small, moving erratically. Could be injured, could be hostile. We're treating it as a potential first contact situation, which means we need to be careful about how we handle this." Walsh's expression was troubled. "The Council wants us to prioritize diplomatic protocols over security concerns." Marcus snorted in disgust. "Diplomatic protocols, right. How'd that work out for the Kepler colony? I know your history, Kane, but this is different. These aren't Zephyrians, and they're clearly in distress. The Council thinks this could be an opportunity to establish relations with a new species. Every alien contact is an opportunity until they start shooting. Marcus's voice carried the bitter weight of experience. You want my advice? Lock down the area, evacuate all non-essential personnel, and wait for them to make the first move. If they're hostile, at least you'll be ready. Walsh was quiet for a moment, considering his words. She'd read his service record, knew about the massacre on Kepler 442b. Whatever else Marcus Kane had become, he'd once been one of the finest soldiers in the colonial marines. His paranoia about aliens might be extreme, but his tactical instincts were still sharp. The problem is we can't just wait, she finally said. Our sensors show the life signs are getting weaker. If we don't act soon, they might die. And if they die in human custody after what appears to be an accident, it could trigger an interstellar incident. Better an incident than another colony getting glassed, Marcus muttered. But he could see Walsh's dilemma. The political realities of galactic diplomacy meant that sometimes you had to take risks, even when every instinct screamed danger. A young security officer approached, saluting smartly. Commander, we've managed to clear most of the debris from the cargo bay entrance. We can see into the wreckage now, but he hesitated, glancing uncertainly at Marcus. Spit it out, Rodriguez, Walsh ordered. Ma'am, the life forms appear to be juveniles, maybe even hatchlings. They're small, maybe a meter long, and they seem to be stuck under a collapsed bulkhead. Our xenobiologist thinks they might be dying. The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mind immediately flashed to the children of Kepler 442b, the young faces he'd failed to save. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget those images, but they came rushing back with painful clarity. Whatever species these creatures belonged to, they were children, and they were suffering. What's the tactical situation? He heard himself asking, his professional training overriding his personal hatred. Walsh looked surprised, but answered promptly. The ship's fusion core is destabilized, but not critical. We've got maybe 6 hours before it either repairs itself or goes critical. The wreckage is unstable. The slightest wrong move could bring the whole section down on top of those life forms. And we still don't know if there are any adult survivors who might view a rescue attempt as an attack. Marcus studied the tactical display on Walsh's tablet, his mind automatically calculating angles of approach, potential hazards, and extraction routes. It was a complex situation that required someone with experience in both combat operations and structural engineering, someone expendable enough that their loss wouldn't create a political incident. I'll go in, he said quietly. Kane, you're not qualified for— I'm the most expendable person you've got, Marcus interrupted. If something goes wrong, if this turns into a shooting match, you can claim I acted without authorization. Protect yourself in the station. And I've got enough combat engineering experience to handle unstable wreckage. Walsh stared at him for a long moment. Why? You hate aliens more than anyone I know. Why risk your life for alien children? Marcus was quiet for several seconds, wrestling with emotions he'd buried for 3 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because they're children. And because I've already failed to save enough children for one lifetime. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Walsh nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what he was offering. She'd lost people under her command too, knew the guilt that came with surviving when others didn't. All right, Kane, but you go in with full support. Rodriguez will monitor your progress and we'll have medical teams standing by. And Kane? She fixed him with a steady stare. You bring them out alive, all of them. That's an order. Marcus nodded and began checking his equipment. As he prepared to enter the wreckage, he tried not to think about the irony of the situation. After 3 years of avoiding aliens, of drowning his hatred in alcohol, he was about to risk his life to save the children of a species he'd never seen before. The universe, it seemed, had a very twisted sense of humor. The twisted wreckage of the smuggler's ship groaned ominously as Marcus made his way through the debris field. His tactical headlamp cut through the smoky darkness, revealing a maze of bent metal, scattered cargo containers, and sparking electrical systems. The ship had been a mid-sized freighter, probably Centauri design, built for speed rather than durability. The explosion had cracked it open like an egg. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. The ship's artificial gravity was failing intermittently, causing loose debris to float and settle in unpredictable patterns. His enhanced hearing picked up the subtle sounds of metal stress, the whisper of escaping atmosphere. And somewhere ahead, something that sounded almost like whimpering. "Kane, what's your status?" Walsh's voice crackled through his comm unit. "Making progress. The ship's more unstable than we thought. I can see where the life signs are coming from, but there's a lot of wreckage between me and them." Marcus paused at a junction where two corridors had collapsed together. "I'm going to need to do some creative demolition to get through." Negative on explosives. "The structural integrity is too compromised." "Copy that. Going manual." Marcus pulled out his plasma cutter, a compact tool designed for emergency hull breaches. The blue-white beam sliced through twisted metal like a hot knife through butter, but he had to work slowly to avoid bringing the whole section down. Each cut sent vibrations through the hull that made him wince, imagining the effect on whatever was trapped ahead. As he worked, his mind wandered to the children of Kepler 442b. He'd tried so hard to save them, organizing evacuation routes and establishing safe zones, but the Zephyrian attack had been too sudden, too overwhelming. He could still see their faces sometimes in the quiet moments between sleep and waking. Young Tommy Morrison, who'd wanted to be a starship pilot. Sarah Chen, who'd collected rocks from every planet her family visited. Dozens of others whose names he'd memorized and whose deaths he carried like stones in his chest. A particularly loud groan from the ship's structure snapped him back to the present. The life signs were getting closer, and now he could hear them clearly. Soft, distressed sounds that tugged at something deep in his chest. Whatever was making those noises was definitely young, definitely scared, and definitely running out of time. Marcus finally cut through the last barrier and found himself looking into what had once been the ship's cargo hold. The space was a disaster zone of collapsed bulkheads and scattered containers, but his eyes immediately found what he was looking for. In the far corner, partially trapped under a fallen support beam, were three small creatures unlike anything he'd ever seen. They were about a meter long, as Rodriguez had reported, but the comparison to any Earth animal fell short. Their bodies were sleek and graceful, covered in what looked like fur that shifted colors in the light, deep blue fading to silver with streaks of gold around their large, expressive eyes. They had 6 limbs, 4 legs, and 2 arm-like appendages, each ending in delicate hands with opposable thumbs. Most striking were the membranous wings folded against their backs. Torn and damaged, but clearly designed for flight, the creatures saw him and recoiled in fear, making soft trilling sounds that somehow conveyed both terror and desperate hope. The largest of the 3, barely bigger than the others, positioned itself protectively in front of its companions despite being obviously injured. Dark blue blood seeped from a gash on its side where the beam had pinned it. "Command, I found them," Marcus reported, his voice softer than usual. 3 juveniles, mammalian or near mammalian, injured but alive. They're trapped under a support beam. Beginning extraction now. Copy that. Medical teams are standing by. And Kane? The xenobiologist says their species might be empathic. Try to keep your emotions calm. Empathic. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. Here he was, a man whose emotions had been twisted into knots of hatred and guilt, being told to stay calm around creatures who could feel what he felt. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty, speaking in the gentle tone he'd once used with frightened children. "Easy there, little ones. I'm here to help." The largest creature tilted its head at his voice, large eyes studying his face with surprising intelligence. It made a soft sound, almost questioning, and Marcus felt something strange happen in his mind. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of what the creature was feeling. Fear, yes, but also a desperate protective love for its companions and a fragile, growing hope that this strange being might not be a threat. The empathic connection lasted only seconds, but it shook Marcus to his core. He'd felt the creature's emotions as clearly as his own, and beneath the fear was something pure and innocent that he'd forgotten could exist. These weren't the calculating warriors who'd destroyed Kepler 442b. These were children, as helpless and dependent as any human child. "Jesus," he whispered, then focused on the task at hand. The support beam was heavy, probably 2 tons of solid metal, but his cybernetic arm was rated for twice that. The trick would be lifting it without causing further collapse. Marcus positioned himself carefully and got a good grip on the beam. "All right, when I lift this, you 3 need to move. Can you understand me?" The largest creature made another soft sound and shifted slightly, wincing in pain but clearly preparing to move. The other two huddled closer together, their color-shifting fur reflecting their fear and confusion. On three. 1, 2, 3. Marcus's cybernetic arm whined with effort as he lifted the beam. The creatures scrambled out from under it with surprising speed, the two smaller ones supporting their injured companion. As soon as they were clear, Marcus lowered the beam and moved toward them. Up close he could see they were even younger than he'd thought. Their features had the soft, unformed quality of very young animals, and their movements carried the unsteady grace of creatures still learning to use their bodies. The injured one was clearly the oldest, maybe the equivalent of a human 10-year-old, while the other two seemed barely past infancy. "Kane, you need to get out of there. The ship's fusion core is showing signs of instability." Walsh's voice cut through his observations. Marcus looked at the three creatures, who were huddled together and watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. The injured one was losing blood, and all three were showing signs of shock and dehydration. They needed medical attention, but they were also clearly terrified of him. He made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Slowly, carefully, he knelt down and held out his hand toward the creatures. The gesture was universal among most spacefaring species, an offer of help, a request for trust. The largest creature looked at his hand for a long moment, then at his face. Marcus felt another brief empathic connection, stronger this time, and suddenly understood what the creature was weighing. It could sense his emotions, could feel the war between his ingrained hatred of aliens and his desperate need to save these children. It was trying to decide whether to trust him with their lives. Finally, with infinite care, the creature reached out and touched Marcus's outstretched hand with one small, delicate finger. The contact sent a jolt of pure emotion through both of them. The creature's gratitude and trust, Marcus's surprised tenderness and protective instincts. For just a moment, species didn't matter. There was only an adult trying to save children, and children trusting an adult to keep them safe. "We're getting out of here," Marcus said firmly, scooping up the injured creature with his cybernetic arm, while gesturing for the others to follow. "All of us. Together." As they made their way back through the wreckage, Marcus found himself thinking about the difference between these gentle beings and the Zephyrian warriors who'd haunted his nightmares. Maybe, just maybe, not all aliens were monsters. Maybe some of them were just people, trying to survive in a hostile universe, protecting the ones they loved. It was a dangerous thought for a man who'd built his entire identity around hatred, but as he carried the injured creature toward safety, Marcus Kane began to wonder if his 3 years of bitter solitude had been based on a terrible mistake. The medical bay hummed with activity as Dr. Elena Vasquez worked to stabilize the injured creature. Marcus stood in the corner, watching as the station's chief medical officer applied her considerable expertise to an anatomy she'd never seen before. The creature, whom the medical team had started calling Alpha for lack of a better designation, lay still on the examination table, its color-shifting fur now a pale gray that Marcus somehow knew indicated pain and exhaustion. The other two, designated Beta and Gamma, huddled together on a nearby bed, their large eyes tracking every movement in the room. They'd refused to be separated from their injured companion, making distressed sounds whenever anyone tried to move them. Dr. Vasquez had given up trying and simply worked around their presence. "The physiology is fascinating," Dr. Vasquez murmured as she sealed the gash on Alpha's side with synthetic tissue. "They're definitely mammalian, but with some unique adaptations. The wing structure suggests they evolved from flying ancestors, and their brain scans show remarkable development in areas associated with emotional processing." "The empathy thing?" Marcus asked, remembering his strange connection with the creatures. "More than that. Their entire nervous system seems designed for emotional communication. They don't just sense emotions, they share them. It's like they're naturally wired for deep empathic bonds." Dr. Vasquez paused in her work, studying the readings on her scanner. "There's something else interesting. Their brain patterns show they're significantly more intelligent than we initially thought. These aren't just animals, Marcus. They're people." The word hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. People. Not monsters, not threats, but people. Young people who'd been orphaned by whatever tragedy had befallen their ship. He found himself thinking about their protective instincts. The way Alpha had shielded the younger ones despite being injured. The trust they'd shown in letting him carry them to safety. Commander Walsh entered the medical bay, her expression grim. We finished analyzing the wreckage. The ship wasn't carrying smuggled tech like we thought. It was a refugee vessel, probably fleeing some kind of conflict. The cargo hold was set up as living quarters for families. Other survivors? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. None. The ship's records show there were originally 12 individuals aboard, 4 adults and 8 juveniles. We found the remains of the adults in the forward section. They were killed instantly when the hull breached. Walsh's voice was heavy with regret. These 3 are the only survivors of their family group. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Orphans. These children were orphans, just like the human children he'd failed to save on Kepler 442b. The parallel was too obvious to ignore, too painful to dismiss. The universe had given him another chance to save children who'd lost everything, and this time they weren't even human. Have we identified their species? He asked. Not yet. They're not in any of our databases, which suggests they're from beyond the known galactic community, probably refugees from one of the ongoing conflicts in the outer spiral. Walsh studied the 3 creatures, her military mind already working through the implications. Which brings up our next problem. What do we do with them? Dr. Vasquez looked up from her patient. They're going to need long-term care. Alpha's injuries will heal, but all 3 are showing signs of malnutrition and psychological trauma. They'll need a stable environment, proper nutrition, and probably some form of therapy to deal with the loss of their family. The Council wants to turn them over to the Galactic Refugee Authority, Walsh said. Standard protocol for unaccompanied alien minors. Marcus felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. No, absolutely not. Both women looked at him in surprise. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Kane, you do realize these are aliens, right? I thought you'd be the first one arguing for them to be removed from the station. They're children. The words came out harder than Marcus intended. Orphaned children who just watched their families die. You want to hand them over to some bureaucratic organization that'll treat them like specimens in a lab? The GRA has protocols for situations like this. Protocols. Marcus spat the word like a curse. The same protocols that left 15,000 colonists defenseless on Kepler 442b? The same protocols that prioritize political considerations over actual human welfare? Dr. Vasquez watched the exchange with growing interest. She'd known Marcus for over a year, had treated his injuries and his nightmares, and she'd never seen him show protective instincts toward anything alien. The change was remarkable and completely unexpected. What are you suggesting? Walsh asked carefully. Marcus looked at the 3 creatures who were watching him with those large, intelligent eyes. Through their empathic abilities, they could probably sense the emotional storm raging inside him. Yet they didn't seem afraid. If anything, their fur was shifting toward warmer colors, blues and golds that somehow conveyed curiosity and tentative hope. I'm suggesting someone needs to take responsibility for them. Someone who understands what they've been through, who can help them deal with the trauma of losing their families. Marcus paused, hardly believing what he was about to say. I'm suggesting that someone should be me. The silence in the medical bay was deafening. Dr. Vasquez's scanner beeped softly as Alpha's vital signs stabilized, but nobody moved to check the readings. Walsh stared at Marcus as if he'd announced his intention to become a professional dancer. You want to adopt 3 alien children, Walsh said slowly, testing each word. I want to give them a chance to heal, a chance to grow up somewhere safe, with someone who won't see them as political assets or scientific curiosities. Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly. Someone who understands what it's like to be the only survivor when everyone you love is dead. Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat. Marcus, I understand the impulse, but caring for children of an unknown species would present enormous challenges. We don't know their dietary needs, their social requirements, their developmental stages. And then there's the legal aspects. We'll figure it out. Marcus moved closer to the bed where Beta and Gamma were huddled. Look at them, Elena, really look at them. They're scared, they're hurt, and they're alone. Does it matter what species they are? Does it matter that they have wings and color-changing fur? They're children who need someone to care about them. Alpha stirred on the examination table, making a soft sound that drew everyone's attention. The creature's eyes focused on Marcus, and suddenly he felt that empathic connection again, stronger than before. Through it, he sensed Alpha's pain and confusion, but also something else, a desperate longing for safety, for someone to take away the fear and make the world make sense again. It was exactly what Marcus had felt as a child himself, growing up in the military orphanages after his parents died in a transport accident. The same desperate need for someone to care, to stay, to not abandon him to the mercy of institutions and strangers. He'd sworn then that if he ever had the chance, he'd never let a child feel that alone and abandoned. "I know what I'm asking for," Marcus said quietly, "and I know how crazy it sounds coming from me. But these children have lost everything, and they deserve better than being turned over to bureaucrats who see them as problems to be solved, rather than people who need love." Walsh was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications. Allowing a traumatized ex-Marine to adopt 3 alien children of unknown capabilities would create a paperwork nightmare that would reach all the way to the colonial administration. On the other hand, she'd read Marcus's psychological profiles, knew about his guilt over the children he'd failed to save. Maybe this was exactly what he needed to find some kind of peace. "The council will fight you on this," she warned. "There'll be hearings, evaluations, probably criminal background checks going back to your childhood. And even if you win, the responsibility would be enormous. These aren't human children. You'd be entering completely uncharted territory." Marcus looked at the 3 creatures again, remembering their trust when they'd let him carry them to safety. "I'm already in uncharted territory, Sarah. Have been for 3 years. Maybe it's time I stopped running from it and started doing something constructive with my life." Dr. Vasquez finished her examination and began updating her charts. "If you're serious about this, Marcus, I'll support you. These children need specialized care, and you're right about the GRA. They'd be treated as research subjects rather than trauma victims. But you'll need help. I'd recommend starting with basic xenobiology courses, child psychology, maybe some linguistics training if we're going to figure out how to communicate with them properly." Alpha made another soft sound, and this time Beta and Gamma responded with similar trills. The 3 of them began what sounded like a conversation, their fur shifting through various colors and patterns. Whatever they were discussing, Marcus could sense through their empathic abilities that it involved him. They were deciding whether to trust him, whether to accept his offer of protection. The thought that his entire future might depend on the decision of 3 alien children should have terrified him. Instead, Marcus found himself hoping desperately that they would choose him, that they would give him the chance to prove he could be something more than a broken soldier drowning in guilt and hatred. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Kane had something to live for. The question was whether 3 orphaned aliens would let him try. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the station's administrative hearing room, facing a panel of officials who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The formal adoption proceedings had turned into a bureaucratic nightmare, just as Walsh had predicted. Representatives from the Colonial Administration, the Galactic Refugee Authority, and the Xenological Ethics Committee had all weighed in with their opinions on why allowing a traumatized ex-Marine to adopt 3 alien children was a spectacularly bad idea. The 3 hatchlings, Marcus had learned they called themselves Kira. Zeph and little Nix sat beside him in specially designed chairs. They'd grown stronger over the past weeks, both physically and emotionally, though they still rarely left each other's side. Their fur now displayed healthier colors, and they'd begun exploring their temporary quarters with the boundless curiosity typical of young minds. Dr. Vasquez had made remarkable progress in understanding their physiology and basic needs. They were omnivores with a preference for fruits and small proteins. They slept in communal nests, and they required daily flight time to maintain their physical and mental health. Most importantly, she'd confirmed that their empathic abilities were indeed central to their species' social structure. They literally could not thrive without emotional connections to others. "Mr. Kane," said Administrator Helena Cross, the stern woman heading the panel, "while we appreciate your intentions regarding these juveniles, the committee has serious concerns about your psychological fitness for this responsibility." Marcus had been expecting this. His military records, including the detailed accounts of his breakdown after Kepler 442b, were spread across the table like accusations. 3 years of drinking, isolation, and barely contained rage didn't exactly paint him as ideal parent material. "With respect, Administrator, my psychological fitness has been evaluated by Dr. Vasquez and certified by the station's counseling staff. I've completed the required xenobiology courses, child development training, and linguistic protocols. I'm financially stable and have permanent residence on the station. Marcus kept his voice level, professional. What more do you need? Dr. Gerald Hoffman from the Xenological Ethics Committee leaned forward, his thin face creased with disapproval. Mr. Kane, your service record shows a documented history of anti-alien sentiment following the Kepler incident. How can we trust that this sudden reversal isn't some form of psychological compensation? These children could become targets for your unresolved trauma. Before Marcus could respond, something unexpected happened. Kira, the oldest of the three and clearly their leader, stood up from her chair and addressed the panel directly. Over the past weeks, Marcus had been working with the station's linguists to decode their language, and Kira had proven remarkably quick at learning basic standard. You fear Marcus' friend hurts us, she said, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. But Marcus' friend already saves us. Marcus' friend gentle with hurt wings, brings food warmth, makes safe nest for sleeping. Why you think Marcus' friend becomes danger thing? The panel members exchanged surprised glances. None of them had expected the children to speak up for themselves, let alone with such clarity. Kira's fur was displaying confident blues and golds, while Zeph and little Nix moved closer to Marcus, their own colors showing trust and affection. The children's attachment to Mr. Kane is noted, Administrator Cross said carefully, but emotional bonds can form even in unhealthy situations. Children often become attached to inadequate caregivers simply because they're the only option available. This time it was Zeph who responded, his younger voice carrying an edge that reminded Marcus of his own stubbornness. Not truth words. We feel Marcus' friend emotions, feel his pain memories of lost nest children. Marcus' friend carries heavy sadness for young ones he could not save. This makes him good protector for us, not danger thing. Dr. Vasquez, who had been observing quietly, spoke up from the audience section. If I may, Administrator Cross, the children's empathic abilities give them insights into emotional states that our psychological evaluations can't match. If they sense that Marcus is a threat, they would instinctively avoid him. Instead, they've bonded with him more completely than I've ever seen with their own species. That raises another concern, Dr. Hoffman interjected. These children's empathic abilities could be influencing Mr. Kane's emotional state artificially. How do we know his apparent improvement isn't just a result of alien manipulation? Marcus felt a surge of anger at the suggestion. But before he could respond, he felt small hands touch his arm. Nix, the youngest, had climbed onto his chair and was looking at him with those large, wise eyes. Through their connection, he felt her gentle reminder to stay calm, to remember that these people were just afraid and didn't understand. Dr. Hoffman, Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled, I appreciate your concerns about mental manipulation, but I've been working with Dr. Vasquez to monitor any changes in my brain chemistry or psychological state. The children's empathic abilities are passive. They can sense emotions, but they can't alter them. Any improvements in my condition come from having a purpose again, having someone to care for besides myself. Administrator Cross shuffled through her papers, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the hearing was taking. Mr. Kane, even assuming your psychological fitness, there's the question of cultural compatibility. These children belong to an unknown species with needs we barely understand. Wouldn't they be better served by the Galactic Refugee Authority's specialized facilities? The GRA facilities are research institutions, Marcus replied bluntly. They'd be studied, cataloged, and treated as specimens rather than children. They'd be safe, fed, and educated, but they'd never have a family. They'd never have someone who sees them as individuals rather than representatives of their species. And you can provide that? Dr. Hoffman's tone was skeptical. Marcus looked at the three children beside him, remembering their trust when he'd carried them from the wreckage, their joy when he'd figured out how to prepare their food properly, their contentment when they curled up together for their afternoon naps. Through their empathic connection, he could feel their anxiety about the proceedings, their fear that these strangers might take them away from the only security they'd known since losing their birth families. I can try, he said simply. I can love them, protect them, and give them a chance to grow up feeling valued for who they are rather than what they represent. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise I'll never give up on them. Kira spoke up again, her musical voice carrying a note of determination. Marcus' friend teaches us strength words for sadness times, teaches us how starwalkers think and feel. We teach Marcus' friend our song speech and warmth sharing. We make good nest family together. Why outsider ones think they know better than us what makes happiness. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Administrator Cross looked increasingly uncomfortable as she realized the children were essentially asking why strangers thought they knew better than the supposed victims what was in their best interest. Commander Walsh, who had been observing from the back of the room, finally stood up. If I may address the panel, I've had the opportunity to observe Mr. Kane's interactions with these children over the past 3 weeks. The improvement in both his psychological state and their physical health has been remarkable. Whatever reservations we might have about the unconventional nature of this arrangement, it's clearly working for all parties involved. Dr. Vasquez nodded in agreement. From a medical standpoint, these children are thriving under Marcus's care. Their nutritional status has improved dramatically, their injuries have healed completely, and their psychological trauma symptoms are resolving at a rate that frankly astounds me. I can't think of a better recommendation for his suitability as their guardian. Administrator Cross looked around the room, clearly recognizing that public opinion was turning against the committee's position. The children themselves were advocating for Marcus, the medical staff supported him, and even the station's security chief was backing his petition. Fighting this would require overruling everyone with direct knowledge of the situation. Very well, she said finally, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely happy with the decision. The committee will approve Mr. Kane's petition for guardianship, pending regular evaluations and the establishment of appropriate educational arrangements for the children. Dr. Vasquez will continue monitoring their health and development, and the station's counseling staff will provide ongoing support for all parties. The relief Marcus felt was almost overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the joy radiating from the 3 children through their empathic bond. Kira immediately launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck, while Zeph and Nyx crowded close, their fur shifting to brilliant golds and warm blues that somehow conveyed pure happiness. For the first time since Kepler 442b, Marcus Kane felt like he was exactly where he belonged. He had a family again, even if it wasn't the kind of family he'd ever imagined. As the panel members filed out and the children chattered excitedly in their musical language about their new official status, Marcus allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found a way to heal the wounds that had defined him for so long. The irony wasn't lost on him that his salvation had come in the form of 3 alien children. But as Nick settled contentedly in his lap and Kira began planning improvements to their quarters, Marcus decided that the universe's sense of humor was exactly what he'd needed all along. 6 months after the adoption, Marcus barely recognized his own life. His quarters had been expanded and completely redesigned to accommodate the needs of 3 growing children. The walls were decorated with colorful drawings that combined human artistic techniques with the flowing musical script of the children's native language. Toys and educational materials filled every corner, and the sleeping area had been converted into a communal nest that all 4 of them shared. Marcus woke each morning to the sound of the children, practicing their flight exercises in the station's modified cargo bay. Dr. Vasquez had insisted that daily flight was crucial for their physical and emotional development, so Commander Walsh had authorized the conversion of an unused storage area into an indoor flight space. Watching them soar through the air with grace and joy had become one of Marcus's favorite parts of each day. The children had adapted to station life with remarkable resilience. Kira, now the equivalent of a human 12-year-old, had thrown herself into learning everything she could about human technology and culture. She spent hours in the station's library, devouring educational programs with an appetite that reminded Marcus of his own hunger for knowledge as a young soldier. Her linguistic abilities were extraordinary. She was already fluent in Standard and had begun learning Centaurian Vegan as well. Zeph, roughly 10 in human equivalents, had developed a fascination with engineering and technical systems. Chief Engineer Martinez had taken him under her wing, teaching him about power systems, life support, and ship design. His empathic abilities gave him an intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems worked, as if he could sense the emotional harmony of properly functioning equipment. Little Nyx, the youngest at perhaps 8 years old, had become the station's unofficial mascot. Her gift for emotional healing had manifested in remarkable ways. She could sense when someone was upset or troubled, and had an uncanny ability to provide exactly the kind of comfort they needed. Several crew members had remarked that a few minutes in Nyx's presence was better than hours of therapy. But it was the changes in Marcus himself that truly amazed everyone who knew him. The bitter, isolated drunk who had haunted the station's cantinas was gone, replaced by a patient, caring father who approached each day with purpose and determination. He'd stopped drinking entirely, had regained the physical fitness of his military days, and had developed a network of relationships throughout the station community. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. There were still nights when the nightmares came, when the memories of Kepler 442b dragged him from sleep in a cold sweat. But now he had 3 small warm bodies pressed against him in the nest, their empathic presence soothing away the worst of his pain. They seemed to understand instinctively when he was struggling, offering comfort without judgment or expectation. Today marked a special milestone. It was the first anniversary of the children's rescue, and Marcus had planned a celebration. He'd spent weeks learning to prepare traditional foods from their homeworld, based on genetic memory fragments that Kira had described in her remarkable way. The children had been excited about the party for days, their fur constantly shifting through brilliant colors of anticipation. The celebration was interrupted by an emergency alert that made Marcus's blood run cold. 3 Zephyrian warships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, broadcasting demands for the immediate surrender of stolen property, namely, the 3 children. Marcus found himself in the station's command center, standing beside Commander Walsh as she coordinated the station's response. The children were safely secured in their quarters under guard, but Marcus could feel their fear and confusion through their empathic bond. They didn't understand why the Scale Warriors had come for them, or what their arrival meant for their new family. The Zephyrians are claiming the children belong to them, Walsh reported grimly. Apparently, they were part of a slave shipment that the smugglers stole before their ship was destroyed. They're demanding immediate return of their property or they'll consider it an act of war. Marcus felt the familiar rage building in his chest. But it was different now, focused and protective rather than blind and destructive. Slaves, those children are not property. They're people, with rights and protections under galactic law. The Zephyrians don't recognize alien rights, Dr. Hoffman, who had arrived to observe the situation, pointed out unhelpfully. To them, non-Zephyrian sentients are just animals to be owned and used. Over my dead body, Marcus growled, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Walsh studied the tactical display with professional detachment. 3 heavy cruisers against 1 border station. Our defenses could hold them off for maybe an hour, assuming they don't have reinforcements coming. The nearest colonial Navy ships are 6 hours away. The command center fell silent as everyone contemplated the mathematics of their situation. Nexus Station was well defended for its size, but it wasn't designed to withstand a sustained assault by capital ships. If the Zephyrians were serious about retrieving the children, there was very little the station could do to stop them. Marcus felt a small hand slip into his and looked down to see Nyx beside him, her large eyes filled with determination. Somehow she and her siblings had escaped their guards and made their way to the command center. Kira and Zeph flanked her, their fur displaying colors of resolve rather than fear. How did you get in here? Walsh demanded, but her tone was more concerned than angry. We feel Marcus' friend's pain anger, Kira explained in her musical voice. We know Scale Warriors come for nest-taking. We not hide while family fights for us. Zeph stepped forward, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Scale Warriors lie. We not property things of their nest. Our birth family flee from Scale Warrior hunters seek freedom place in far stars. We children of free-flight people, not slave things. Commander Walsh looked at the children with new understanding. You're refugees from Zephyrian territory. That changes everything legally. Under galactic refugee law, we can't surrender you to your oppressors. Try telling that to 3 heavy cruisers, Dr. Hoffman muttered. Marcus knelt down to eye level with the children, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Listen to me, all of you. I need you to go back to our quarters and stay there no matter what happens. Dr. Vasquez will take care of you if something happens to me. No. The word came from all 3 children simultaneously, their fur shifting to deep reds and blacks of distress. Family stays together. We not leave Marcus' friend to face Scale Warriors alone. Through their empathic bond, Marcus felt their absolute determination not to be separated from him, their willingness to face any danger rather than lose another family. It was the same protective instinct he'd seen when he first found them in the wreckage. the same fierce loyalty that had sustained them through the loss of their birth families. "They're right," he said, standing and facing Walsh with military bearing. "We're a family. We face this together." Walsh studied him for a moment, recognizing the return of the soldier she'd known before Kepler 442b had broken him. "What are you thinking, Kane?" "I'm thinking that 3 years ago I failed to protect children from Zephyrian warships. I'm not going to fail again." Marcus's voice carried the quiet certainty of absolute commitment. The station's defenses might not be able to stop 3 cruisers, but they don't need to stop them. They just need to delay them long enough. Long enough for what? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the smile of a man who knew exactly what he was fighting for. "Long enough for me to remind the galaxy why you don't threaten a human's family." "The Zephyrians want a war?" "They're about to learn what humans do to slavers who come for our children." The children's fur brightened to brilliant golds and blues, their empathic abilities picking up Marcus's determination and reflecting it back to him amplified. Through their bond, he felt their absolute faith in him, their certainty that their human father would find a way to protect them. For the first time since Kepler 442b, Marcus Kane felt like a soldier again. But this time he wasn't fighting for duty or orders or abstract principles. He was fighting for love, for family, for 3 small beings who had saved his soul by trusting him with their lives. The Zephyrians were about to discover why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species when their children were threatened. Marcus only hoped the lesson wouldn't cost more lives than necessary. The Zephyrian fleet commander clearly expected immediate surrender. When Nexus Station's response to his demands was a polite but firm rejection, followed by a formal declaration of refugee protection under galactic law, his reptilian features twisted with contempt on the main view screen. "You harbor stolen property of the Zephyrian Collective," Commander Vask hissed, his scaled hide gleaming under the harsh lights of his bridge. "Return the slave spawn immediately, or face the consequences of defying superior beings." Marcus stood beside Commander Walsh in the station's command center, his 3 children pressed close against him. Through their empathic bond, he could feel their fear, but also their trust in him. They believed he would find a way to protect them, and that faith gave him strength he hadn't felt in years. "Commander Vask," Walsh replied with diplomatic precision, "the individuals you refer to are free sentients under the protection of this station and the Colonial Alliance. They have requested asylum, which we are legally bound to provide. We cannot surrender them to slavery." Vask's laugh was like grinding metal. "Your human laws mean nothing to the collective. You have 1 standard hour to comply, or we will take what belongs to us by force." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Everyone knew the station's limitations. Even with their upgraded defenses, they couldn't hold off 3 heavy cruisers indefinitely. But Marcus had been using that hour to implement a plan that would have seemed insane to anyone who didn't understand what these children meant to him. "Marcus, you can't be serious about this," Dr. Vasquez said as she reviewed his hastily prepared documentation. "The risk factors alone." "The risk factors of doing nothing are higher," Marcus interrupted. "Sarah, are the communication arrays ready?" Commander Walsh nodded grimly. "All galactic frequencies are open. Emergency protocols are active. But Marcus, even if this works, there's no guarantee the response will arrive in time." Marcus knelt down and gathered his 3 children into his arms, feeling their small bodies trembling against him. "Kira, Zeph, Nix, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to do might seem scary, but I need you to trust me. No matter what happens, remember that you are not property. You are my children, and I will always fight for you." Kira's musical voice was steady despite her fear. "We trust Marcus, friend. We know you keep family safe." The first plasma bolts from the Zephyrian ship struck the station shields exactly 1 hour later. The lights flickered as power was redirected to defensive systems, and the children instinctively pressed closer to Marcus. Through their empathic abilities, he shared his calm determination with them, letting them feel his absolute commitment to their protection. "Shields at 90%, reported the tactical officer. "But Commander, they're not trying to destroy the station. They're targeting specific systems, communications, weapons, life support. They want to disable us, not kill us. They want the children alive," Marcus realized, "which means they'll eventually try to board us." Walsh's expression was grim. "Our security forces can hold the docking bays for maybe 30 minutes against Zephyrian assault troops. After that, Marcus stood up, his decision made. Then we don't wait for them to board. I'm going out there. That's suicide, Kane. Those are heavy cruisers with full military crews. No, Marcus said, pulling up the station's external sensor displays. That's exactly what they're expecting us to think. But look at their formation, their attack patterns. They're not treating this as a military engagement. They're treating it as a police action to recover stolen property. They're underestimating us because they don't understand what they're really facing. Commander Walsh studied the tactical display, her military training parsing the implications of the Zephyrian ship positions. They're overconfident, sloppy. They think 3 ships against 1 station is guaranteed victory. They've never fought humans defending their children, Marcus said, his voice carrying the cold certainty of absolute purpose, and they're about to learn why that's a mistake. The plan Marcus had conceived was born from desperation, tactical knowledge, and the unique advantages his unconventional family provided. The children's empathic abilities had revealed something crucial about Zephyrian psychology. Their rigid hierarchical society made them vulnerable to specific types of psychological warfare. As the station's shields weakened under sustained bombardment, Marcus made his way to the docking bay where a modified shuttle waited. The modifications were crude but effective: enhanced communication arrays, reinforced hull plating, and most importantly, a direct empathic interface that would allow the children to broadcast their emotional state across all frequencies. Marcus' friend, Little Nix, whispered as he strapped her into the shuttle's modified seating. Are we really going to fly into the Stardark with the metal birds hunting us? We're going to do something better, Marcus replied, his hands steady on the shuttle's controls despite the enormity of what he was attempting. We're going to remind the galaxy what happens when someone threatens a human family. The shuttle launched from the station just as the Zephyrian ships moved into boarding position. Marcus flew directly toward the lead cruiser, broadcasting on all frequencies, not just communication channels, but emergency beacons that would reach every listening post within 50 light years. This is Marcus Kane, guardian of Kira, Zeph, and Nix of the Etherian people, his voice carried across space, amplified by the station's remaining communication arrays. These children are free citizens under the protection of the Colonial Alliance. The Zephyrian Collective has demanded their return to slavery and is using military force to capture children who have committed no crime. The children, connected through their empathic abilities to the shuttle's communication system, began broadcasting their emotions directly. Every receiving station, every ship within range, every monitoring post in 3-star systems suddenly felt what the children felt. Their fear, their desperate love for their human father, their absolute trust that he would protect them even at the cost of his own life. The effect was immediate and devastating. The children's empathic broadcast didn't just transmit their emotions, it transmitted the purity of their bond with Marcus, the depth of love and protection that defined their family. Across human space, military commanders, civilian authorities, and ordinary citizens felt the terror of children facing slavery and the desperate courage of the man fighting to save them. Commander Vask's reptilian features twisted with confusion as emergency transmissions flooded his communication channels. What is this human doing? Why are they broadcasting emotional manipulation? It's not manipulation, Marcus replied, his shuttle now close enough for direct communication with the Zephyrian flagship. It's truth. Every human in this sector now knows exactly what you're trying to do. They know you're using warships to capture children. And Commander Vask, humans really don't like people who hurt children. The first colonial Navy ships began dropping out of hyperspace 30 minutes later. Not the distant reinforcements that were supposed to arrive in 6 hours, but emergency response fleets that had been mobilized by the empathic broadcast. The children's emotions had reached beyond military channels, beyond official protocols, directly into the hearts of every human who heard them. Within 2 hours, the Zephyrian ships found themselves facing not one border station, but a growing fleet of human vessels whose crews had volunteered for immediate deployment. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers, marine transports took aggressive positions, and heavy cruisers locked weapons on the Zephyrian fleet. This is Admiral Chen of the Colonial Third Fleet, came the broadcast that ended the standoff. Commander Vask, you are ordered to withdraw immediately from this system. Any attempt to harm civilians under Alliance protection will be considered an act of war against humanity. Marcus felt the children's emotions shift from fear to wonder as they watched the human fleet surround the Zephyrian ships. Through their empathic abilities, they could sense the protective fury of thousands of human crew members who had heard their broadcast and responded with the instinctive ferocity of a species defending its young. Commander Vask's final transmission was filled with barely contained rage. "This is not over, humans. The collective does not forget stolen property." "Neither do we," Marcus replied, his voice carrying across open channels to both fleets. "And these aren't property, Vask, they're our children. Touch them again, and you'll learn exactly why humanity earned its reputation among the stars." As the Zephyrian ships retreated, Marcus guided his shuttle back to the station, his 3 children chattering excitedly in their musical language about the beautiful starships that had come to protect them. Through their empathic bond, he felt their overwhelming gratitude and love, their absolute certainty that their human father would always keep them safe. Later, as the family settled back into their quarters while human ships patrolled the system perimeter, Kira curled up against Marcus's chest and asked, "Marcus, friend, why did so many Starwalkers come to help us? We are small ones of different species. Why do humans care for not-human children?" Marcus thought about the question for a long moment, remembering his own journey from hatred to love, from isolation to family.
"Because that's what families do,"